you can. All right, now before we get into the trailer for Paul Thomas Anderson's next film, the sequel to 2018's Venom finally hit theaters after 1,000,001 delays due to COVID-19 and other bullshit reasons. Venom Let There Be Carnage shows Eddie Brock and Venom battling another alien symbiote that's attached to a Woody Harrelson-shaped serial killer instead of a beta businessman, and that's pretty much all that's different in the general concept of this film. And now I'm just going to start out and say, before the movie, we saw a lot of good previews. We saw the trailer for Dune. We saw the trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home. We saw the trailer for No Time to Die. And I'm going to be honest, all these put together were better than the movie that we saw.
Of course they were. What did you expect from a Venom sequel?
Yeah, and again... yeah, exactly. I mean, like, honestly, overall, like, I still feel like this is an improvement over the last film, even though it's... And again, like, obviously, it's not saying too much, but still. And I think one of the things that definitely weighs this movie down is that at 97 minutes long, or 97 or so minutes long, this movie still managed to feel longer than it was, you know. And again, like, do you feel like the movie dragged it
longer? Man, this movie was too quick. The second those credits rolled, I was like,
really?
Wait, is
okay.
it? Nothing happened. I mean, that's just, again, I did not like Venom 1. I didn't. And as a comic fan as well, Venom was one of my favorite villains. Seeing how they portrayed him was kind of a big no for me from the first Venom. Venom 2, still don't like it. I think I did say in the theater I liked it more than the first, but more that I think about it, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. I still don't like it. Again, I like certain aspects, like the comedy. That's the direction they're going in. But just, it's such a weird thing because I didn't like the movie. The main things I liked was Carnage's design, Venom's design, Woody Harrelson as Cletus to a certain extent, and Cletus as a character, I guess, to a certain extent. And that's relatively it for me. Like that, and that's the unfortunate part for me personally. So,
you know, staying on the topic of Cletus, I still think, even though he's definitely him and the other villains are still like underwritten in this film. Cletus Cassidy, I think, as a villain is still better than the villain from the first film, because I thought he was terrible. He was absolutely terrible. Casting wise, acting wise, just writing wise and dialogue wise, he was terrible. He was a terrible villain. Whereas when it comes to at least Cletus Cassidy, like, okay, I still felt like he was kind of like underwritten, but at least you had Woody Harrelson.
Exactly.
Who did honestly, I thought he did a good job with what he did a good job with what he was given. He wasn't given much to work with, but it was still a good job. And still, again, as the main villain, it was definitely an improvement over the last film.
Yeah, like for me, definitely, like if I had to compare it to the first one, I think this one, villain-wise, was definitely better, but still, to a certain extent, it felt very mixed mash with different intentions that just didn't land and different motivations that I was just like, this doesn't make sense. And knowing myself and knowing the comics, I was like, okay, why did they say this when it's obviously not true, but okay. So it was a weird mixed bag not mixed bag. I just didn't like the movie. Again, the comedy hit to a certain extent.
Yeah. I mean,
you know, the designs, Carnage, everything.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Even Carnage, I liked him, but not fully. I didn't love him. They downplayed him. They dialed him down tremendously, in my opinion. And that's where I think the PG-13 rating
I agree.
hinders, I guess, what a Venom film and even what Carnage can truly be if they just let loose with an R rating. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I remember talking to a friend of mine who said that if, you know, Venom Let There Be Carnage is rated PG-13, then it's gonna be a flop, which I think his prediction turned out to be accurate. Again, like going back to like the comedy that you were saying in the film, and again, like the comedy really is because of Venom.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of times when he was actually very, very funny, but unfortunately too, there are a lot of times when I had a hard time understanding what he was saying because his voice felt very muffled at times.
Yeah, like I said, comedy was only to a certain extent for me. So, which is why it's hard. I think for people that like the first one, they're gonna like this one, straight up. But if they didn't like the first one,
fair.
they're really not gonna like the second one. This one.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's not like I hated this movie. Like, I walked out of this movie feeling like, eh. As just like the movie itself, I felt, eh. It was still, like I said, I still think it's still better than the first one. But now, in terms of like Eddie and Venom's like relationship, like I still feel like they just fight like an old married couple, which they kind of did in the first one. So this in here kind of felt like more of the same. There's certain things that go in a different direction, which I don't want to say right now because of spoilers. But like, I don't know, it still felt like a lot of the same. What'd you think of their relationship overall? Like, do you feel like it felt like anything new? Is it still entertaining?
Just
what do you
same
think?
old, same old. I don't think anything's really developed other than, like you said, no spoilers. But just even to that, it's like, oh, you think they're actually going to develop something, and then they kind of don't, or they kind of don't really flesh it out, which is also another disappointing aspect of the film. Because again, it's like the film feels like it's going to develop something, like a certain moment of a character, maybe what they're thinking, and then all of a sudden they just take a backseat. And they're like, okay, you know what, we're going to stop. We're going to go a different direction. Again, and this is where it's like, even with Cletus Cassidy's character, I felt like his motivations were all over the place. And it's understandable considering the type of character he is, but then at the same time, I think it messed with the film's overall, I guess, a bit of the structure and some of the pacing, mainly because it was confusing at times, because it's like, okay, you go from almost a somewhat of a character study or somewhat of like trying to dive deep into Cletus. It seems like you're going a really interesting route with him, and then all of a sudden you just switch at 180 and it doesn't feel as authentic as it should, or it's just a random abrupt transition that just doesn't feel organic or satisfying. So, and that's why it's like I like Cletus to a certain extent is really that confusion of mixed messaging and, I guess, motivations for this character. And I felt that it was a bit over the place and nothing really was concrete with him. But at the same time, again, he's a serial killer, understandable. But again, I think narrative-wise, it just didn't really work for me, at least.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying there. And going, I guess, staying on the topic of Cletus, his love interest, like the other villain in the film, right? Shriek. Yeah, I was saying, what do you think of her? Like, do you feel like she was necessary? Because honestly, like, looking at this, or just like, again, just remembering, I just felt like she was just like kind of over the top, and I just feel like she didn't really bring much to the table.
She wasn't believable, in my opinion. She was over the top, and this goes into where it's like, it looked like they had two motivations for him, but they couldn't decide, and they ended up going with the love interest, which didn't work for me. And it's like, if they just took her out, took the original motivation that I kind of saw what they were going with, I would have liked that a bit more. But again, this is like, you might as well have taken her out of the film. I didn't think she served really a big purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there. And again, I think the biggest determinant over whether or not someone is going to enjoy this film is that there's a sort of ridiculousness that you need to embrace in order to really enjoy this movie. And I think, without giving away too much, you can look, Darius, you and I can look back at certain scenes and realize that's the case. And I'm going to be honest, in terms of embracing that, I wasn't always able to do that, So I guess, like, maybe that's why, like, I had a hard time. I don't know if it's that, like, I had a hard time enjoying this movie while I was watching it, because, like, I guess I was entertained, but just walking out of it, I'm like,
Yeah,
Because, like, there were so many times throughout this where I was like, what am I watching? Like, what am I watching? What did I do in my life that brought me here to this moment? Like, that's how I felt throughout so many points in the film.
Yeah, like, for me, I was entertained, but it was only when they were doing the jokes and some of the action sequences. That was it. But then even some of the action sequences, I just felt so numbed that I was just like, I don't care. Like I said, if you like the first Venom, you're probably gonna like this one. If you didn't like the first one, you're definitely not gonna like this one. If you're a fan of Carnage, you may be a bit disappointed. like how I was to a certain extent.
Mm.
And that extent is really, and I'm gonna be frank, I think Sony making it PG-13 is a hindrance to a character like Venom's true potential in live action.
Yeah. I agree with you there too, because again, I feel like I don't have a problem with them going for the comedy. In fact, without the comedy in these films has been like the main reason to enjoy any bit of them. But I feel like if they could balance that with like an actual horror element, then I think you could really have something that stands out. And again, I feel like they'd only be able to effectively pull off that real horror element with something like Venom if it was rated R, if they would actually be able to take that step. But yeah, I mean, and honestly too, another thing that's like, I guess like kind of separate from the movie, that's like the best part of the movie is the post-credit scene. Now, again, like honestly, like we shouldn't give anything away here, but honestly, the post-credit scene is the biggest reason to watch this movie, unless you want to wait a few more days for it to get miraculously leaked online. But like honestly, like without giving too much away, it definitely
opens the doors,
gives you something to look forward to. Yeah, it opens a lot of doors. And again, I think it was my brother that said it best. Like this movie served as something to get me pumped for what's to come.
Yeah, and this is where I have to say to me it's unfortunate that they're doing this type of stuff for other things down the road, because it's like that you should just try to make a good movie instead of focusing on future whatever plans you have, Like Venom overall, just it feels like they're trying to build a Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man and have Venom be that character. And that's why it just doesn't work with me, because Venom is not Spider-Man in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, like again, like overall, like I just felt like this movie is, it wasn't terrible. Like I said, it was it's mediocre and like forgettable. There's some good performances, honestly. Like I said, Woody Harrelson. I still feel like Tom Hardy is giving it his all too. Yeah, even though I feel like he doesn't have so much to work with himself, but yeah, it's what it is. Like as far as like this movie being worth however many delays it got, it definitely wasn't worth the wait. It really wasn't. It really wasn't worth like everything being so
I called it.
Yep, you did. No, you definitely did. We talked about the trailer, and I'm like, maybe this won't be so bad. And there's another situation where the trailer is better than the movie. So now again, for all you guys that are still watching or listening, excuse me, what did you think of Venom: Let There Be Carnage? Did the first film deserve a sequel? Again, was it worth all the delays that it got? Leave your thoughts in the comment section.